Hello, friends. Okay, so this week we've been talking about fairy tales. We did The Three Little Pigs, we did Goldilocks and the Three Bears, we did Little Red Riding Hood, and today we're going to do Cinderella. Now, I'm sure probably a lot of you have seen the movie Cinderella, and like I said, there's a lot of different versions of all these stories. So we're going to hear two stories tonight, and we're going to compare and contrast them. We learned about comparing and contrasting. It means to talk about. Compare is the things that are the same, and contrast are the things that are different. So we're going to read two stories tonight, and then we're going to make a chart. This is called a Venn diagram. We've done these in class, if you remember. So the stories that we're going to read are two Cinderella stories, but they're two different Cinderella stories. This one is a more traditional Cinderella story, and then the other one is Cinderella and the Fairy Dog Father. So it's a different kind of Cinderella story. And then after we read both stories, we're going to talk about the things in the middle are the things that both stories have in common. And then the things that just this Cinderella story have go over here. And the things just the Clifford story have go over there. That's a Venn diagram. It's a great way to compare and contrast. So let's get started. First, we'll read the traditional Cinderella story. Okay, it's fairy tale storytime books, Cinderella. Okay, and we have the fairy godmother, the clock that strikes 12, the mice, the pumpkin, and she's dressed in rags. We know that's Cinderella. So let's get started. There once was a girl who was pretty and kind, but had two evil sisters who shouted and whined. The girl, Cinderella, was made to do chores. She lived in the cellar and polished the floors. She kept hoping that things would get better, and one day they did through a royal stamped letter. So there she is. An invitation to the palace ball, saying, "Come to our party, come one and all." Sorry. Cinderella really wanted to go, but her unkind sisters just said no. Cinderella was crying when she heard a crack. She got a shock, for the room had turned black. Oh, poor Cinderella. She just wants to go to the ball. Who's that? Then before her eyes, unlike any other, appeared a beautiful fairy godmother. And take a look at her wand. That's the craft we're going to make today. Taking a pumpkin and some mice too, the fairy made Cinderella's wish come true. She turned the pumpkin into the coach and the mice into her footmen and horses. The fairy dressed Cinderella in a glittering gown and gave her a carriage to drive to town. The mice were footmen to serve her all night, and her shoes were glass slippers that fit just right. "Be home before midnight," the fairy said, as Cinderella drove to the palace ahead. Cinderella danced with the prince 20 times, then stopped in shock at the clock's midnight chimes. Cinderella ran home, but she lost a shoe. It was found on the stairs. What could the prince do? The very next day, he went to the town to find his princess and give her a crown. The prince saw Cinderella all covered in soot, but still tried to fit the shoe on her foot. "Hooray!" said the prince. "It fits you just right. We shall get married this very night." The end. So that was kind of a quick version of the Cinderella story. It didn't have a lot of detail, but it told the story the way we know it, right? Okay, so now we're going to read Cinderella and the Fairy Dogfather. And we're going to see how the two stories are different. The author of the Clifford books is Norman Bridwell. He wrote all the Clifford books. Okay, so. Hello, I'm Emily Elizabeth, and this is Clifford, my big red dog. Every night, we cuddle up and my dad tells us a story. My dad loves making Clifford and me the stars of the story. Tonight, we're reading Cinderella. Once upon a time, a young prince moved to a new village. He wanted to make friends, so he invited all the villagers to a ball in his castle. The invitation said that the villagers should wear their fanciest clothes to meet the prince. At the ball, there would be dancing, games, and yummy food. Sounds good. All the villagers were excited, but a girl named Cinderella was sad. Everyone would be at the ball, everyone except for her. You see, Cinderella didn't have a fancy dress to wear or a carriage to take her. That meant there was no way that she could go. So she's, just like the last one, she's cleaning, and she has her mouse friends. As Cinderella imagined how much fun she would have at the ball and how nice it would have been to make a new friend, a big red dog suddenly appeared. His name was Clifford, and he explained that he was Cinderella's fairy dogfather. So his wand has a bone instead of a star. With a wave of his magic wand, Clifford made Cinderella a beautiful dress to wear, though it was a little slobbery. Oh, Clifford. She looks beautiful. Clifford waved his wand again and turned a pumpkin into a beautiful carriage. He changed some mice into horses and a frog into a driver. That's funny. At last, Cinderella had a way to get to the ball so she can become one of the prince's new friends. But there was no time to lose. Clifford's spell would only last until midnight, just like in the last book. Uh-oh. Crack. Oh no, Clifford. Clifford changed his collar into a fancy bow tie. If the carriage couldn't take Cinderella to the castle, he would take her there himself. So that's something different. Soon, Cinderella made her grand entrance at the ball. Clifford made an entrance, too. Oh, my goodness. He broke through the wall. Clifford and Cinderella met the prince and said thank you for inviting them. The prince was very nice. He had never seen such a big red dog before. He really liked Clifford's giant bow tie and Cinderella's sparkly dress. As they talked, the band struck up the music. Cinderella was the first to hit the dance floor, showing off her best moves, and Clifford sang along to every tune. They played games next. Clifford loved musical chairs, and he won every round, but the prince didn't mind. He and Cinderella thought Clifford was very funny. Next, it was time for dinner. The prince's servants had cooked up the tastiest foods from all over the world. Clifford had quite a big appetite, but Cinderella saved the prince a tasty treat to share. Some cake. Cinderella and her fairy dog father were having so much fun, they lost track of time, and it was almost midnight. They had to get home quickly or the spell would wear off. Cinderella's fancy dress would turn into a tattered old dress again. Clifford and Cinderella left in a big hurry. There wasn't even time to say goodbye to the prince. Uh-oh, what happened? Just like in the first story, she lost her shoe. Clifford galloped home with Cinderella on his back. They arrived home just after midnight, but something was wrong. In all the hurry to get back, Cinderella had lost her slipper. Clifford ran back to the castle to get it. Luckily, he was very good at fetch. Well, that is different. When Clifford returned, though, he had brought the prince back with him. Cinderella was nervous. The prince had met a fancy girl at the ball. Would he still want to be her friend if she was dressed in rags? Cinderella didn't have to worry. The prince liked Cinderella's sparkly dress, it was true, but he also liked her silly dance moves, the fun they had playing musical chairs, and her kindness in sharing the last slice of cake with him. And the prince really liked her fairy dog father, Clifford. That night, Cinderella had made a true friend. Well, 2 true friends. The end. Okay, so I really liked that story. That was a very cute version of Cinderella. Now, let's talk about the things. First, we'll talk about the things that both stories had. So, I'll write those in pink. So, both stories had Cinderella dressed in rags, right? And cleaning the floor. And not being able to go to the ball. Both stories had some magic, making a dress, right? Both stories had the pumpkin turning into a carriage. Both stories had Cinderella meeting the prince. And both stories had Cinderella losing her shoe. Okay, so they had a lot of things in common that we compared. Those are the things that are the same. Now, let's talk about some of the things that were different with the two stories. They did have a lot of differences. So, in the Clifford version of the story, it didn't talk about any mean stepsisters. So I'm going to write that down. No mean sisters. Also, it was a dog, not a fairy. It was the dog father, right? And his wand was a bone instead of a star. Also, in the Clifford story, that he broke the carriage, so Clifford took Cinderella to the ball, and he stayed with her at the ball, right? So Clifford went to the ball. And that was different. Also, and I think this was a really nice part of the story, the prince was really just trying to make friends. He didn't need to get married or fall in love. He wanted to make some nice friends because he just moved there. So that was nice. He made friends. The prince made friends. So that was really nice. Now let's talk about the other Cinderella story. Okay. Now that Cinderella story was different. It was more traditional than the Clifford story. So the Cinderella story had the mean sisters, right? It had the fairy godmother. Cinderella went to the castle in a carriage. And she met the prince. And, they both danced together. That's one of the things that was the same, right? They both danced together in both stories. And they both lost their shoe. But in this one, Clifford brought the prince back to Cinderella. In this one, the prince had to search for Cinderella. He searched for Cinderella, right? And she had to try on the shoe. And what happened at the very end? In this story, they were so happy and they decided they were all friends. In this story, Cinderella and the prince got married. So that was very different. So even though both books were based on the same story, they had so many things that were different, but they did have a lot of things that were the same. That's the fun part about fairy tales. You can listen to different stories, and even though they're the same story, they may be very, very different. Okay. The next video will be a quick one, making our fairy godmother wand. And hopefully I will see all of you tomorrow for our Zoom session at noon. Oh, today. It's today. I make the videos the night before. So it's tomorrow, but really it's today. Okay, I'll see you guys soon. Love you. Mwah.